On this episode, I get jealous. Jealous of a cool degree and the cool job that my guest got with it. His name is Nolan, and something I'm not jealous of is him being a super hot shower person. Nolan didn't really know what he wanted to go to school for, so instinctively he chose psychology, which begs the question, why? The why is more like a what. What was missing, what he needed, what he was looking for. The fulfillment of helping others find comfort in this world that's not always easy to navigate. We also talk about how to solve a Rubik's Cube without taking the stickers off. Let's jump in.
Everybody, welcome to a Moderately Good podcast. I am really excited about tonight because we're going to talk a bunch of like therapy, like mind stuff, and you know how I'm into that. But before I get started, I'm going to do my shout outs. Joe Andrade Media does all my camera work, cool pictures. You can find him on Instagram at Joe Andrade Media. Jason, he's my audio guy. You can find him on Wish Pocket. He does everything from bar mitzvahs to like rock bands. Like, you know, if you want your audio to sound great, that's why I sound great. So Jason, Wish Pocket. My guy, Jaron, he has No Names Originals. He does custom clothing, bleaching. He does artwork, and he's a local artist in North Carolina. So support local artists in North Carolina. And then last but not least, my guy Mo, he has a Go Bubble app. And if you use the promo code Go Moderately, you get a discount. Still don't know it, just go use it. That's a detailing service like to your home, kind of like Uber. Oh, and if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe. It helps me out so much. And if you're on Spotify or Apple, just click follow. Boop. I'm just going to go ahead and I always try to think of something cool to say before I introduce people, but it never works out. So everybody say hi to my guy, Nolan. Say hi.
Hello.
I know Nolan through his dad. I work with his dad. He's one of my clients, and so we have crossed paths in the gym that his dad works out at and stuff like that, and just had like really cool, like interesting 5-minute conversations. So I was like, "Hey, you want to come do this for like 3 hours?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm not doing anything." So really quickly, Nolan, just tell people kind of like what you do, like what your job is, what you do, kind of who you are.
Yeah, so I live up in Burlington, Vermont, and I
Is that home of Burlington Coat Factory?
I think so. That's a great question.
You didn't know the questions were going to be so hard, did you?
No, I should have done my research.
We'll look it up later. There's people yelling at the radio. Of course it is. That's where they make the teddy bears.
Right? They're like, you've lived there for 15 years. How do you not know?
So you're in Burlington, Vermont.
Yeah, Burlington, Vermont. And I work at a place called Baird School, which is a school for kids with emotional and behavioral issues. And I'm a clinician at that school.
So when you say clinician, what does that mean?
So basically, you know, with a school that's like, you know, an alternative program like this, it basically works with like kind of 2 tracks. Like there are the education folks who deal with the education, teaching, you know, the kids, but then there's this other group of folks that work on the, you know, behavioral clinical side of things. So it's basically we're the ones who are doing our best to make sure that the kids are available, you know, emotionally and psychologically for the learning, making sure that they're sitting at their desks.
So it's different. It's different than like a regular public school, because a regular public school, they might have like one counselor, right?
Yeah.
And there y'all have a whole section that helps like take care of these kids, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, there's probably give or take, there's 50 kids at the school. We do kindergarten through 8th grade, and there's 5 clinicians, and we each have, so, you know, roughly 10 kids on our caseload that we're assigned to. But then on top of that, there are what are called behavioral interventionists, or, you know, you might hear me refer to them as BIs. There is one BI for every classroom that helps the teacher kind of manage the behaviors of the kids.
So they're in the classroom all the time with the teacher?
All day, every day with the teacher.
And just out of curiosity, what is their like background? What's their qualification? What do they do to become a BI?
So this is the BIs. The basic qualification is having a college degree. A lot of them are, have like maybe a psychology degree background. And this is very commonly like the BI position is oftentimes sort of a transition job for a lot of people where it's like they have graduated college, maybe they're considering grad school, getting their master's degree in clinical psych or something, but they're, maybe want to get some experience in the field, something like that. So they will come on as a BI and work in the school.
So as a clinician, like what's like your main like job? Like what do you do with like your team mainly for these kids?
Oh boy, it's hard to distill it into one thing, but
just rough.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a few things that I do. Some of it is kind of behind the scenes work with the families. So I'm in regular communication with the parents, kind of figuring out how things are going at home. If there's behavioral issues with the kids at home, maybe trying to help them with that. If they're in need of some services, whether that's outpatient therapy or maybe getting a clinician into the home. I'll write referrals for other programs and services that they can access, things like that. So those are the back end things. And then in terms of the work with the kids, like I will do some work with the BIs around my kind of 10 clients, spend time with the BIs talking about like here's the best way to work with
they're an extension of you in each room.
It's kind of like I'm ideally the clinicians are kind of guiding the work that the BIs are doing, and giving that kind of extra clinical support to help that work be really effective. And then but when it comes to like what actually most of my day consists of, it is I will be, at my computer doing some paperwork or something, and I hear one of my kids scream in the hallway and run past my door or something, and I'm like, oh, gonna go help with that. And so like, as kids are having like bigger behaviors, which happens, throughout the day, I'm like kind of on the floor supporting, maybe helping the BI to work with my student, get them regulated, get them back to class. Or maybe if it's a longer, bigger behavior, I might just switch out the BI so they can get back to the classroom, and I'll stay and work with the kid in one of our like regulation rooms or in the hallways and kind of ideally get them back into a space as soon as possible where they can get back into the classroom and access their education.
How do you I think of it like kind of like being a firefighter, right? Like, so like you're asleep, right? And then the alarms go off and you have to go like fight a fire. Mm-hmm. It's like you're doing this like paperwork and you totally have to like mind shift like quickly, right? Like, so how, like, do you have like kind of a process in how you do that? Or is it just like so hat now that like you just do it and don't even think about it?
It's just automatic because like it's just all day, every day. Like, it's funny you talked about being a firefighter, because like when I'm talking with my girlfriend afterwards, particularly on a busy day, I was like, it just felt like I was going around putting out fires all day, just bouncing from one fire to another.
Does that give you like any perspective on the importance of things in the sense of like what matters and what doesn't? Because there's so many events that happen like every day, but you can't really get stuck on one event too much, right? You know what I mean? Like, because there's going to be another event. And I was just wondering if it makes you kind of like when all these things happen all the time, like not make, I don't know how I want to word that, not make you numb, but like you're like, maybe you just have a different perspective. Do you feel like your perspective changed from working that job?
Yeah, absolutely. It has definitely given me a different perspective on like what's a big deal and what's not.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. Yeah.
One of the things that I I really love about the job. I mean, there's a bunch of things, but I love being able to work with the families where, these kids are coming from public school, and oftentimes like these parents are just they're getting calls every day from a public school. It's like, your kid did this again. We need you to come in, and it's just this nonstop negative about their kids. And I love being able to work with these families that have that experience. And, I'll call them at the end of the day and I might be like, hey, Johnny, he had a great day. I mean, he did have one behavior. He did, throw a chair and we had to clear the classroom, but hey, we worked through it. He processed it and he moved on. And he had a great rest of his day. So we're super proud of him and we're looking forward to seeing him tomorrow. Yeah. And that it's such a, you can oftentimes feel the relief on the parents of like, oh, like these people, like they like my kid. They're excited to see him.
Well, I don't want to say this sounds so shitty to say I'm putting a positive spin on it, but like you're finding the positive in the day and presenting that information instead of making the main presentation the negative part of the day. And I think that makes a big difference on the kid's mindset and the parents' mindset when they go into the next day. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not about, it's trying not to emphasize like, maybe two kids, get in a fight. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's just verbal, whatever. But, oftentimes, kids are used to being rejected or those things being a big deal. Sit them down and being like, hey, people get mad sometimes.
Yeah.
And everyone, you're all here for the same thing. So like, let's just go make amends. Let's go talk to them. These two kids that were like at each other's throats, 30 minutes ago, they come back together and it's like, they one apologizes, the other apologizes. And it's like they high five and 5 minutes later, they're back in the classroom playing together. And it's the emphasis on the, so it's like when I'm calling the parent, I'm like, yeah, had a little incident with another kid, but did a great job with the repair work, really good job processing and moved on and had a really good end to his day. And like, that was awesome.
Really quickly, this is really fun for me, but if it, like, in your professional opinion, if I'm messing up my kid, I need you to let me know.
All right.
So, she'll, like, I think every kid does this. I think that, in moments where she doesn't have words and she can't say what she wants, she just screams like at the top of her lungs, right? My favorite thing to do is to do nothing, to do absolutely nothing. And I'll just let her scream. And then I'll just kind of like get down on her level and I go, let's go, what's up? Like that, you know what I mean? And sometimes she'll scream like right in my face and I stay really silent and I'm just like, what do you need? That's like usually my next word. Is that pretty solid?
Yeah, I think, the, staying calm in those moments is, but it's absolutely the right thing to do.
Like the bad part about it is like, I kind of enjoy it. I kind of enjoy her just losing her mind and then not reacting to it. And I feel like it makes her do it less. I feel like when she doesn't get a reaction from us, I feel like that should be very basic information. And it's really easy to like, if your kid's screaming to say like, shut the fuck up. But like, I don't think that does any good. But I'm also like, I'm a very new parent. This is very new. She's like jumping out of her window at 13. I might have a wholly different like thing. I wanted to ask you about this. Because I think this first part is pretty common for people, but I'm curious about how you got to what. So I think like on your forum, I had asked for like an interesting story and you had said like when you went to college, you didn't know what you wanted to do.
Oh yeah.
And then all of a sudden you just like, you picked something, right? And then you were like, fast track, I'm going to do this whole thing.
Yeah.
So what I'm curious about is kind of why did you not know what you wanted to do? When you thought of this subject, because I don't want to give away the subject, I want to let you tell it. So when you came to this, what made you feel like you needed to choose it? And then what made you fast track it? Like how did that whole set of events like happen?
Yeah. So when I believe it was, it was the summer between, graduating high school and starting college, I went to the, kind of student orientation over the summer. And at that point I had no idea what I wanted to study, mostly because I didn't like school. I hated school all growing up, didn't find it interesting.
Do you know why you hated school? Like now as an adult, do you know why you didn't like school?
Yeah, because the material wasn't presented to me in an interesting and
It didn't stimulate you.
engaging way, and I don't blame my teachers for that. I think that there's just the way that our education system is designed is much more around this like sort of memorization of facts or dates and material, and it's not presented in a way that stimulates most students' minds. Some kids flourish in that environment, and more power to them. But I think more than that, it leaves a lot of kids just hating school.
Ooh, like keep going. I don't want to say anything. Just keep going. Keep going with the story. So you go to college, because I have a question, but I want to wait and see what you say. So you go to college. Okay,
yeah.
It's the summer. You're trying to decide what you want to do.
So I have no idea what I want to do because every subject sounds horrible. So at the orientation, this big auditorium, and with all these kids, and they're like, "All right, time to go to the department where you're doing your major." So political science, go to the political science, right? Everyone's going to divide up and go. And they're like, and if you're going to be undeclared or don't have a major yet, just pick something and go. And so they're announcing, all the majors, and they, one of them, they announces psychology, and that's one area that I had no like academic or educational experience in, but it always sounded, interesting.
Like when you were younger?
I always enjoyed talking to my friends, like very in depth about their struggles or what was going on, and like having these deep conversations, maybe trying to give advice and things like that. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to go listen to psychology program pitch. And so I go there and I'm sitting in the room, and the head of the department's up there talking about what the clinical psych program looks like and what it'll involve. And as I'm sitting there listening, I go, all right, this sounds interesting. And, obviously I can always change my major. So why not just start here rather than undeclared? Like, whatever, might as well pick something. And so it was kind of in that moment that I decided, like, okay, yeah, I'll be a psychology major. And then they start talking about this accelerated program where you can get your bachelor's in 3 years and then a master's in 1 year. And I was just kind of like, well, I'm going to be a psychology major. I mean, I might as well just go all in. So I was like, all right, I'm going to sign up for the accelerated program. And so, in the span of half an hour, I went from undeclared, no idea what I wanted to do, to being in the accelerated program for a clinical psychology degree. And
did you feel like that's what you were supposed to be doing? Did something not tell you, but like, did it feel like that's what I'm supposed to do?
Yeah, there was something that just as I was listening to them, talk about the program, I mean, there were just something, sort of clicking with me of like, I could. Yeah, I'll be a psychology major. Like, it wasn't like a flippant, like, I might as well do something, but it was this like, yeah, like, I like this idea of doing psychology. I think this is going to be a good fit for me. And again, but it was always this like, but I can always change it. Like, so, even though it's not like I was 100%, it wasn't as though everything just sort of fell into place in that moment. There was this sort of what was being discussed just sort of resonated with me. And so, I signed up, and the rest is history.
Do you know what's so weird for me is I couldn't go. I wasn't, my grades weren't good enough for me to go to a major university. So I had to go to a community college. And from the time I was a kid, there was only really two things I was really interested in. And oh, by the way, school sucked. It was horrible. Like I wasn't stimulated to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably something that's very similar for us is that there was something else I wanted to learn and they just didn't teach it there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was a kid, the two things I was really interested in was like being a stand-up comic and psychology,
Mm-hmm.
like the way people work and think. And I remember sitting in a class, like I took one class at this junior college. I was taking other classes and I took this one class, like psychology class or whatever. And I just remember thinking like, I would love to do this, but like, what am I going to do? Like be a therapist? Like I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that there was all these jobs and all these things. And, you know, and the way it's kind of grown even to now, there's probably so much more than when I went to school. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll just be an art major.
Yeah.
But like, it's kind of weird. It feels like when we talked about our similarities or have talked about our similarities, it's a very similar path, but then you actually chose it. And I was like, I'll just take the easy route of being an art major. Not like I was going to make any money over there anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's just so interesting. You know.
Well, but it's interesting because like there did end up though being this very winding sort of path to get me where I am today, because I at first, you know, when I became you know, got into clinical psychology, was like, I want to do therapy. That's kind of the route that I want to go down. And over the course of the clinical psych master's program, I actually kind of started to sour on the idea of like being a therapist, doing one-on-one therapy. It was largely the idea that, I mean, I think there was two factors. There was that people, you know, it was a developing an understanding of like, you know, people's problems and, you know, what they're dealing with in their life is so multifaceted and so profound oftentimes that I became skeptical of how helpful sitting down 1 hour a week and kind of talking could be. Like, you know, it sort of was the sort of what we were talking about, what we've been talking about around like, you know, broader systemic issues really being the root cause. You know, not to say that people haven't gotten amazing benefits from, you know, talk therapy, but at least that was sort of the headspace that I was in at the time, where I was like, you know, I'm not sure that this is really, you know, the solution. And then there was just also the more personal aspect of like being the therapist, like sitting across, you know, for 8 hours a day or something, you know, these various clients and just, you know, listening and having that. I'm like, I'm not sure that I have the energy, like that I have the disposition for that.
You're an empath, right? Mm-hmm. So like you're taking on a lot of those people's feelings and emotions that they're bringing to the table. That's like, I mean, that's what I think is partly interesting about the job that you chose and stuff, is because, I mean, you have to take on a lot of stuff, you know?
Yeah. So, you know, it's interesting because, well, I'll sort of loop back to like, you know, when I finished this arc around like what it is that I really enjoy about the job. But, you know, and also at the time, you know, I was sort of thinking that I might want to work with kids. And, you know, and again, particularly with the idea of like individual therapy with kids, it's like, if a kid's experiencing issues, the problem's at home, right? Mm-hmm. It's with the parents, it's in the environment. So like, what am I going to do 1 hour a week with a kid when I'm sending them right back into the environment that's causing all of these issues? And so I sort of started to sour on, you know, thinking like, oh, maybe clinical psych isn't what I want to do. And then it was time for me to write a thesis. And it was around that time that I discovered existential psychology. And
really quickly, what's existential psychology?
Existential psychology is it's about the sort of bigger issues. Like there's sort of, I would sort of describe it as there being like four main, you know, broad topics within existential psychology, being like fears related to like death, meaninglessness, isolation, freedom. So like these are kind of bigger philosophical
ideas.
Ideas. And when I came across this kind of area of psychology that I was largely unfamiliar with up until this point, I found it absolutely fascinating.
Sure.
I loved it. Like, this was actually, it wasn't until the end of my master's program that I actually discovered a love of learning. Like, that was actually the point where like this switch flipped, and all of a sudden, like, I went from like not wanting to read and like not wanting to learn to read it to like voraciously reading books and just sucking up everything that I could. And so then I made this pivot to deciding like, oh, well, maybe like I want to go the research and kind of academia route and study existential psychology. And so I ended up applying for a PhD program up at the University of Vermont and got accepted, where I studied social psychology with like a specialty in existential psychology, kind of focusing on things related to like death and the isolation pieces, and loved the ideas and the philosophical ideas and things. But over the course of the PhD program, was like, I'm actually not sure that like research is what I want to be doing with the rest of my life either. And I was thinking like, okay, I think it's teaching. Like, I think I've got a skill in the area of teaching. And so like, maybe I just want to get a job at like, a university or a community college or something, and have a teaching position that doesn't have a research component to it. But after I graduated with the PhD, that first year, like I got a couple interviews, but didn't get an offer anywhere. And so it was like, well, what am I going to do now? Because like, those kind of jobs are cyclical in terms of how they're offered. And the woman that I was dating at the time, she had a job at the mental health agency that the Baird schools run through. And she was like, well, you've got your master's degree in clinical psych. Like, you could just, get a job, at the agency while you're waiting for your next position. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good point. And so I kind of went back into the clinical field. I got a job at a residential program called Cabot House. And I was thinking like, this is just sort of a temporary kind of stopgap, to have a job until I go back into, teaching in academia. And so it was this residential program with these kids. And I found that I just like, I really loved the work. And, unfortunately, like after a year at the Cabot House, due to funding cuts, the Cabot House got closed down. And so that's when I transitioned within the agency over to the Baird School, where I was working with the same population of kids, just in a school setting instead of a residential setting. And yeah, I've just found that I loved the work, and I've gotten a lot of satisfaction out of it, and really don't, have a desire to go back into the, academia or teaching setting.
I have just a quick question. Would it be fair to say existential psychology? That's what, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that you get to, like in your current job, you get to apply some of those ideas of like keeping that in mind when you're working with your kids? Is that fair?
It's interesting to think about a lot of the ideas and how they apply to the kids that I work with. Like, so for instance, with like the idea of isolation,
Mm-hmm.
as being one of the key components, the key kind of philosophical concept of this fear of isolation is that idea of like, you come into the world alone, you go through the world alone and you leave the world alone. Like there is a fundamental, no matter how close you and I get, no matter how much we get each other, there is still this fundamental separation where I am experiencing the world as me, you are experiencing the world as you, and there's just always going to be that gap, that isolation of us each kind of having our own internal experiences. And there's certainly ways to not fully overcome it, but to lessen that burden, to feel that connection, as social creatures. But that isolation is always there, and it's sort of always nagging at us. And I think about, the experience that the kids that I work with have in their sense of isolation. That, one of the ways that we overcome isolation is through shared experiences. When you and I are listening to a piece of music and we both love it, we're like, oh my gosh, this is so good. And you're looking, and I can tell you're feeling the same way. And it sort of reaffirms that like I am experiencing the world as the same way that someone else is. And it sort of relieves that sense of isolation, that it's like, no, I'm not on my own. I've got this other person that is sharing in this experience with me. Well, with these kids, their experiences are often wildly different than that of their peers. Right. A math assignment gets passed out and they freak out while all the other kids are sitting around going, what are you doing? What's happening?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there is this profound sense of isolation. Whereas, coming to Baird School,
Everybody's doing that.
yeah, in some ways, right, that isolation, because it's like they see that shared experience that, these kids that they're with, even though oftentimes they don't get along, or they're angry with each other, or they're fighting, there is that, oh, I'm not alone. It's not just me,
Right,
that experiences these things.
Yeah.
So there's pieces like that are interesting ways to think about.
How did the pandemic affect your kids that you work with?
Oh, I mean, the pandemic had a really profound impact, I think, on a lot of the kids that we work with. Just I think on a number of levels. So for starters, we had to go remote for a period of time, just like a lot of schools around the country. But the populations that we serve are underprivileged, poorer populations, where I had to work with families to get them set up with internet in the house, because like they didn't have that. We oftentimes had to provide them with like the computers and show families how to set up Zoom, and like to use all of this kind of online infrastructure that the kids and their parents weren't familiar with, with navigating. And the times that we would have those Zoom calls, with the kids during the day, was the only time they were getting any type of socialization. Other than that, they were basically, in their homes with their parents, pretty isolated. So
Are most of the kids that come in there pretty like loners, like already kind of isolated kids, like they already don't get along with kids, or do they come in and they get along because they kind of have some sort of a similar bond or similar kind of mindset?
Well, that's that's a really interesting facet of our school. So kids that as they're coming in, have an experience where they're coming from public school, and in the public school, they will have these really big behaviors. They will, flip their lid at some point, and they will have, trash the classroom, and like the classroom has to get evacuated. And so all the kids have to leave as they have this big behavior. And at public school, those kids, the other kids, like they're not used to that. Like this is a really big deal. And so the kids, these Baird School kids, they will find themselves, ostracized, right? Like they're the problem kid, or like, they'll have a big behavior and all of a sudden the other students are scared to talk to them. And so they have this history of being rejected by both their peers and oftentimes the adults.
Yeah, say their parents,
in
right?
their life. Where, I'm, at least in the school kind of setting, like, the teachers and things that, aren't, don't know how to handle this and don't know where it's coming from, so like they have an experience of like having these big behaviors and having burned a lot of bridges and being very socially isolated. Whereas when they come to Baird School, it is this kind of beautiful, like, band of misfits where there is this bond in that they all have many of the same struggles. And so classrooms get cleared because one or more kids have some big behavior on a pretty regular basis. And so for those kids that are leaving the classroom, they're just like, whatever, like, and they hop up and they roll out, and go to the library or whatever. And then when everything's calm, everyone just comes back in and everyone moves on with their day, because those kids that were leaving, they know, tomorrow that's going to be me. I'm going to be the one flipping tables and they're going to be the ones leaving.
Right.
And so there is this sort of community in that they all have these same struggles. It's
really quickly.
Yeah.
Do you think when those kids do that in a public school, it's this kind of weird cry out for help, kind of like trying to make a scene, right? Would you say like it's an outburst like that, or is it deeper than that? Because I guess my question is if in a public school they're using that as like an outburst to be seen or to not be ignored or whatever, and then you get to this other school and everybody's doing it, then it almost was like, why do it? Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I don't think that the behaviors are a cry to be seen so much. I mean, there certainly are attention-seeking behaviors that you see, but the kids that we work with, I would say close to all of them have trauma histories. So, they've got sexual abuse in their past. They've been physically abused. They've been, neglected. And those early experiences have all sorts of profound impacts in terms of how a child develops, how they their ability to manage stress, or the bandwidth that they have for handling, minor frustrations, their ability to navigate social situations and things.
Is it something like this? Like, like someone will have some sort of traumatic like event happen to them, right? And then I don't want to say like it splits their personality, but it changes them, where like it's like they're not the same person afterwards, right? Is that happening on a real small level when they're like really little in these traumatic events, and that's why they're kind of is that closer to why they have the outburst?
So,
or am I like just totally off base on all this?
Well, no, this is, these are all kind of still active areas of research.
So they really kind of don't know exactly,
questions. Huh? Yeah, but I mean, I think there's lots of interesting things to go off of. So, for example, if a kid has, parents that are together, that are attuned to them, that have, where they've built a secure attachment, kids can have a traumatic event in their life. They could have, their house burned down. They could be in a really scary car accident.
But without that parental.
And with that parental attunement, they can process it. They can make sense of it. They have a space to be able to, share their negative feelings, and they have parents that are, going to attune to them and help them make sense out of that situation. And those kids, they're going to be fine. Sometimes parents, hear about this stuff and they think, I can never let anything bad happen to my kid. Or like, if I ever make a mistake, they're going to be traumatized. And, kids are resilient. What happens is where things really get problematic is in the sort of prolonged, repeated traumas of being
Abuse of
in
whatever
an
sort.
abusive household, or of, or of just being neglected. When kids are very young, from the time, infancy, through those earliest years, kids come into the world not having a sense of self.
Right.
Right. The whole world is just a wash of stimulus and feelings, and like there's no sense of self. And so they get that sense of self through their interaction with their caregivers. So they get, and they develop their sense of the world through their interactions with their caregivers. So that idea of like, if I'm hungry, I'm going to be fed. When I'm scared, I'm going to be comforted. When, all of those different types of things. And when kids get that, when they learn, like, if I, soil myself, I'm going to be changed and dried and cleaned up, right? All of those things both let them know that like their needs are going to be met. It lets them know that the world is a safe place that they can explore, and that they have, the sort of internal locus of control that they can impact how they're going to be cared for. And those things are really important in terms of tuning all those kind of internal, stress responses and things in a healthy and productive way that allows them to explore the world.
You're their Sherpa. Your parent. I mean, you were the one guiding them through this planet.
Exactly.
Until at least they're 18. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and oftentimes, kids that don't have that, they have a very different experience of the world. When kids are hungry and they're not getting fed, or, they're scared and in need of soothing and their parents not available, they're, in their bedroom dealing with their own things, when they soil themselves and they don't get changed, things like that. All of a sudden, the child learns like, oh, the world is a dangerous place. My
you don't know what
needs,
security looks like.
yeah, my needs aren't going to be met. They don't have that internal locus of control, because like when I cry out for help or in need of soothing, it doesn't work, right?
Right.
It doesn't have an impact. And so those kids, that development of the brain and the body and all the internal regulation systems forms very, very differently for those kids. And, and it has a profound impact on them throughout their life.
Okay. Just like, if you can, like, just really quickly, what percentage of kids that end up at your school do not have a support system from their parents, roughly? Like, it's like 50%, 80%. Is it an astronomical number, or is it like not a non-factor?
No, it's difficult to put a number on it, simply because there's a whole gamut of what these kids are dealing with. So for instance, some of my kids, they are currently living with their grandparents. So they went through serious trauma earlier in their life when they were with their parents. Parents have, for whatever reason, given up custody or no longer in the picture. They're now living with their grandparents. Grandparents in some of those situations are great. They're, doing their best to be attentive and things, but,
some are old.
Yeah. And they're also dealing with a kid that now has
trauma,
that trauma history. Yeah. And like, they are now higher needs kids. It's not it's not as easy as just putting them in a better environment and everything kind of magically works itself out. So there's those situations. There's families I've got where the parents are, maybe they had a drug history when those kids were younger. And those kids, and so they weren't attuned to their kids at a very early age. Maybe they were, exposing the kids to a certain population of people, in the house that, without proper supervision, that was allowing them to be sexually or physically abused. Those things. now the parent has cleaned up their act, right? So maybe that kid was in foster care for a little while. The parent got treatment, they got help, and now the kid's back at home, and they're trying their best.
Would it be fair to say sometimes it's hard for those kids to kind of recover from that? Like when I don't want to say you've already broken that trust, but like that trauma's already happened, and then the parent comes back and goes, okay, I'm ready to do this, and the kid's kind of like, what the fuck? I mean, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so when that kid comes back, it's kind of like, it's hard for them just to give over that trust, just hand it over back to him. It takes a lot of time, I think, and a lot of like therapy and like working around that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say that's absolutely true. Now, the kids aren't thinking about it on such an explicit level around like, hey, you weren't there for me when I was younger, and now like they're not processing things on that level
at a younger age.
Yeah,
maybe older, like you get older and you kind of like stuff's not going the right way. You go to therapy, and then you kind of realize like, oh, like that lack of support when I was younger, it makes it hard for me to trust that person again, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like when those kids, become high school or, adults, you kind of get the cognitive sophistication to really be able to make sense out and really reflect on what happened to you and how it shaped you. But, when you're talking about a fourth or fifth grader, they're still in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Way in it. Right.
Yeah.
How much does like economic status, like how rich or poor, or how much does that affect the kids that come to school? Are the majority of the kids like in like low income, or is it just like all over the place, or does it have no effect?
No, the population that we serve is almost exclusively lower socioeconomic status. Like these kids are on. I think I've had one family in my entire time that was not on Medicaid for the kids. So like socioeconomic status has huge impacts on these kids' development and the stressors that they have in their life.
The only reason I asked was, as I was like, like you don't have to be poor to be absent. You know what I'm saying? Like you can be rich and be an absent parent, right?
Yeah.
And so I was just curious if you saw any of that, but also it just sounds like that lack of resources really has a huge impact on people and their ability to live, right?
Yeah, I've always had this theory that, if I think that the mental health services that we offer, while important, are a Band-Aid over much deeper problems. But I have a personal theory. Like if you took two identical communities, low socioeconomic status, lots of mental health issues, poor job prospects, all the things that you associate with poorer communities. If you took those two groups, took one of them and just, gave massive...
Sorry about that.
If you took one of those communities and gave massive amounts of mental health services to them, but did nothing for socioeconomic stuff, you took that other community and did no mental health services, but created a, basic income, jobs programs, affordable housing, all, like all those basic kind of infrastructure things. I think that second community would have better mental health outcomes 10, 15 years down the road.
When everybody is engaged and there's kind of that harmony, I feel like that, like you see that in like tribes, like places, right? Where they have not everything they need and want, but like because they have community, they survive and they thrive with what they have, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. We are inherently social creatures, and
that's the way we're built, right?
I'm sorry.
That's the way we're built. We're built to be social, right?
Absolutely, and a lot of the isolation that people experience in modern society has profound negative impacts. So yeah, in terms of, you know, that infrastructure that you'd be funding in that second community, some of that would be funding the YMCA, right? Creating basketball, sports programs and clubs for kids to be a part of, you know, and to be able to get together. Like those types of basic kind of infrastructure things, I think would have a far more profound impact on mental health than, you know, just the services. Because, you know, one of the things that happens, you know, the parents like of the kids that I serve oftentimes, you know, get a really bad rap. And, you know, don't get me wrong, you know, there's things that they could be doing better, but, you know, oftentimes like they're doing their best.
That's
like
how they got
these are parents that, you know, have their own trauma history that they're dealing with,
and they might not have dealt with enough or all the way, right? Like they might still be in the middle of their trauma while they're not trying to have trauma and give trauma to their kids, and that's the best they got, right?
Yep. And in addition to all of that, they're stressed out about, am I going to make rent this month? Am I going to have enough money for groceries? My car broke down. I don't have the money to fix it. Like the amount of stress that financial burdens and financial insecurity puts on parents and families and brings in all sorts of toxic problems into the family system that would be totally avoidable if, you know, they had jobs, you know, if they had affordable housing, if we had public transportation that was decent. To keep on maybe the topic around like, you know, funding of like basic social services and these jobs programs, you know, what you would see is, you know, if this were to start, you know, right now, tomorrow, you know, you would see better outcomes for the children that are growing up right now. They would be, when they become adults, they would be, it wouldn't be perfect, but they'd be doing better than their parents did who didn't have any of that. And their improvements would then have them more able to attune to their kids and have better kids, right? So like it wouldn't be an all in one, you know, all at once or one generation change, but you would just, you know, if you were to study it over time, you would just see gradual improvements in each generation.
Okay, I have a question. So we'll just call this utopia, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there's more than one reason, but can you think of like, what do you think is the main reason that this has not happened or is not happening, or to say couldn't happen? Like why, what do you think is stopping that utopia from happening?
I mean, we live in a capitalist society that doesn't prioritize any of that.
How do you feel about empathy?
I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
I'm pro empathy.
I'm pro empathy, right? I think, you know, it sounds kind of a little hippity dippity to say that like that's just what we lack. But I think when you talk about like being a good person or being a good Christian or being a good neighbor or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
it is like it's like leading with empathy. Like that is what you should lead with. Like I'm sure when you see your kids, like you don't go, well, this kid was just like an asshole. He just yelled at me or something. And you don't go like that kid fucking yelled at me. You go, oh man, like why? There must be something behind. He must be frustrated. There must be something behind this. How can I approach him in a caring way for him to feel supported, not to have to do that, not yelling at him, not yelling back, not matching what he's doing. Right. And that's not easy, but it feels so good.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And I think that utopia, in my opinion, that utopia to happen has to start with just like a shit ton of empathy. Like people just going around and just starting the meter of good going in the right direction, right?
Yeah, I think, you know, empathy's great, but I think the issue is that, like, you know, putting yourself in someone else's shoes and thinking about it, like that takes bandwidth in your brain to do. Right. And
you only have so much, right?
Yeah. And when all of your brain power is occupied with how am I going to pay rent? Where's the next paycheck coming from? How I've got all this stuff going on with my kids. Like you only have so much, you can handle in your brain. And so when all of that's going on, you don't have the bandwidth to go, stop. Let me think about this other person and what's going on with them. You've got to have those other basic needs met before you can start doing some of those higher order mental processes of putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
Right. So on my little questionnaire, I have a question. So I just want to pick your brain for a second.
Yeah.
So I asked, like, what's the last movie you cried at?
Mm-hmm.
And you put anything and everything, or everything, everywhere and everything, or something like that.
Oh yeah, it's Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Right. So I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say probably you're an empath. You're pretty empathic. You feel things pretty strongly.
Yeah, I would say so.
So my question is, how do you do your job as an empath, right? Because I'm sure you feel for every one of these kids. Like, you're feeling their pain and their struggle and stuff like that. But I'm assuming, like, when you talk about I only have so much bandwidth, like, you have to know where to boundary yourself so that they don't drown you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just curious, like, how you handle that in such a intense job.
Yeah, I think what you have to be able to do in like the type of work that I do is you have to be able to compartmentalize.
At least temporarily, right? Like, you don't want to do that across your entire life all the time, but like at some point, like, you have to kind of hold things off to the side. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, I work, 8 to 4, and the school day goes till 2:30. So, in terms of being with the kids, so, it's like when I come in at 8 until 2:30, those kids, the families that I work with,
they're your priority.
They have my full attention and engagement, and that's what I'm doing. When I leave work at 4,
you're outie.
I am not thinking about it again until I go back into work at 8.
Right.
Like, so it's like I've got to leave, when I step out of my office, get in my car and I drive home, done. Like, no more thinking about it.
Really quickly, you still have you're still dating your girlfriend, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just make sure. I didn't want to.
Yeah.
And do y'all live together?
No, not currently.
Okay. I was going to say, do you have anything you do to decompress kind of before you see her, so that like you don't come home with any of that stuff? Or is there anything you do that you decompress like before you do anything else coming out of your job?
So, one of the things that, when my girlfriend and I, when we see each other, she will ask me about my day, and there is value, I say I completely leave it, when I leave for the day, but there is some like, oh my gosh, listen to what happened today, this crazy, experience of a kid's flipping tables, or these restraints I was in, or like, all this wild stuff, and there is some, catharsis in sharing that. And so, I will do some of that with her, which is really beneficial. But, in terms of what I do to kind of maintain my balance, actually, one of my things that I will always do at the end of the day is like, I'll just take a shower. I find showers to be one of the most relaxing.
Okay, how hot we talking? This is it like super hot?
I mean,
are you a super hot shower person?
Yeah, I definitely go on the side.
I dated this girl like in college, and like she was a super hot shower person.
Yeah, and
like I like hot. I mean, I'm not some weirdo that takes a bunch of cold showers, but this was like ridiculously fucking hot, and I was just like, this is, because like we take a shower together, or whatever, and I would just like stand behind her and like use her as a shield because I was like, this is too hot. Anyways, so you come home, take a hot shower. That's your deal.
Yeah, and it like from the time I was a kid, I've always found showers incredibly relaxing. And so I'll come home from, a very stressful day, take a shower. It's the first thing that I do. In the morning. So like, I like to work out in the morning. that's another, sort of bookends to the day, but like getting in the gym before work, gets me awake, gets me energized.
It's great for your body, and it's great for your metabolism, by the way. Like just working out early is really great for you. Like it gets you, like you probably feel fired up coming out of there.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm like ready to take
let's help some kids.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, I'm ready to take on the day. So, I've found that, that's really good for me, and it forces me to go to bed at a decent hour because
it also makes you tired so you can go to bed.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so, there's these little things that sort of, but yeah, having that routine of getting up at like, 5:30 or 6 to get in the gym so I can do that before I go to work at 8, kind of imposes some discipline on me, that I might not otherwise have. And helps rejuvenate me and keeps me energized.
This is kind of going back to this. I thought of this earlier and I didn't ask you. I'm just curious. Does working at your job and what you see, does that affect on any level of you wanting to have kids or not have kids? And I only ask that because, like, do you, like, this is what and being a dad now, this is what I've recognized. This is a very serious job. Like, you need to take this very seriously.
Yeah,
it's very important, right?
Absolutely.
And you're probably gonna like fuck up your kids a little bit, and they're gonna need some therapy. So put a little money aside. It's fine, right? But like, you at least should be very intentional about what you do, right? And I think if I worked where you work, it would be really hard to see all that and go, man, like the responsibility of this is like so huge, it's so big. Like, I don't know if I would want to do that. Is that I'm curious how you feel. That I just thought that might be a feeling of yours just because you see so much,
Yeah, I don't want to have kids. But it's not.
It was way before that. Like,
I kind of made that decision beforehand, and that really just stemmed from not. It's kind of like you said, like being a parent is a huge job. Like if you're going to have kids and you have a kid for the next 18 years, your life, it feels like kind of revolves around raising that kid and, getting them to school or getting them to their sports program, like all these different things. And, for me, it was just like, there's, other things that I want to do with my life. And,
but you recognize that though, right? Like, that's very important. I think a lot of people, they're like, man, I want to do a lot of things with my life, but like, I guess we could have a kid. Like, I mean, like, that sounds cool. And then you're like, oh, I guess I'm gonna put all my dreams aside and then regret this decision and be, a dick, like for the next 18 years. Like, if you know you don't want to have kids, like, just don't have them. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And so like for me, actually, I think working at this job actually, maybe scratches some of that itch of, getting that, getting that time with kids. Cause I do like kids. It's not obviously with the work that I do, you gotta like kids. And so, this work that I do, maybe scratches some of that itch, in a way that's really satisfying. What it has done though, working at this job has given me a completely skewed perspective of what a normal kid looks like. Because of the population that I work with, if I'm seeing, kids in a normal setting and someone just like hands a kid a pair of scissors and they start cutting, I'm like, you're really going to give that kid scissors? And I'm like, oh my gosh, look at them. They're using the scissors. They're not trying to stab anyone. What a well-behaved kid.
Wow. I mean, you're doing a great job. Didn't try to stab anybody.
Yeah, or I remember this one time I was sitting outside of, I was having breakfast out in front of a place called City Market up in Burlington. It's a grocery store and breakfast spot. And I was sitting outside, and this dad, had like maybe a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and he set them at one of the benches. He's like, I'll be right back. And he went into the store, and I'm like, what are you doing? And I watched, and you know what those kids did?
Stay right there.
Yeah, nothing.
Yeah.
Just sat there. The little one walked around a little bit, and the older one looked after him. 10 minutes later, Dad came out, and they left. My mind was blown. Like, you know,
As a parent, my mind's not blown about the part about them sitting there. My mind's blown about the part of him leaving them there. Like, because at this point in my life, I wouldn't leave my daughter just sitting out like by herself or something like that. But it's only because I'm scared of what other people would do, not because of her, because I think she would be fine.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. You met her. She seems like she's doing all right. Right. I mean,
seems like she's doing just fine.
Yeah. You know, and we try to be as interactive as we can as possible. You know?
Yeah.
Do you subscribe to the idea of like you kind of meet everybody for a reason?
I don't. You know, I tend to think my personal feeling is that you know, we you know, that meetings and encounters are random, but that we make meaning out of them, and we find value, and
so I think in you saying that, I think we're both right in the sense of when you meet someone, you have to like kind of invest. You have to make a value in them, and then you might find a reason of why you meet them. But if you never even explore that person, you might not figure out why you met them. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think so. This is interesting. Well, no, it's interesting. We'll explore this. Because what do you mean by why you met them? So, for instance, are you?
I was going to reference your dad. I feel like I know why I met your dad.
Oh, I'd be interested to hear that.
I will make a short, simple statement, and then you have follow-up questions. I'm a person. I'm very empathic. I'm not super empathic, but I mean, I have enough that makes it, you know, sometimes difficult. And I had to learn how to set boundaries, right? And like, believe in what I believe in and be my most authentic person. And God bless your dad. He challenges that shit all the time. He pushes my boundaries all the time. God bless you, Jeff. But I needed that. I needed someone to push me so that I would have to stand up. You know what I mean? And that's one of the things I really like about my relationship with your dad is that we have that. And like, in this weird way, because I do that, I think he respects me more. You know what I mean? And I thought in the past, and this is why I'd asked you kind of a question earlier, I think that's why your dad respects you so much too, in a very similar way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
What can you give me an example of when that's kind of needed to be navigated between the two of you?
Sometimes it's like stupid conversations like basketball. You know what I mean? Like I just believe something about basketball, and like, oh, like this would be this is gonna sound stupid, but it's an easy example. Like, you know, I understand that the Spurs are a great basketball team, and the way they play basketball, like that's how James Naismith was like, this is how basketball should be.
Yeah.
But it's boring.
Yeah.
It's boring. And, you know, and so I have to like really stand my ground about like why I like basketball the way it is. And that's a very light example, but it's just like, the easiest way to say it. It's like, it's a differencing of opinion on a subject. You know what I mean? And not going, just because a person is older or wiser or a better job or whatever qualifications they have that makes you feel like that you're inferior, that like, I do have value in my opinion. And I do believe in this. I'm open to the idea of the change of ideas, but like, I don't like understand, like I don't have to. Yeah. I don't have to change my mind. Like, you know what I mean? I'll listen, but I don't have to change my mind. Like it's not necessarily your job to convince me to change my mind. It's the job to discuss it and then be open to the space allowing me to change my mind. I can give you a great example of that with your dad. Before I started doing this podcast, roughly before I had my daughter, my mindset was, it's like, it's not my responsibility to be necessarily a role model or have influence on people. That's not my responsibility. Like, you are your own person. You need to take care of yourself. Like, my influence like, it's not it's not going to have like whatever you're going to do is what you get, like my influence has no effect on that. And your dad was like, your influence does have effect on people. You do need to recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I don't agree. You know what I mean? And we went around and around about it, you know. And then I started doing the podcast, and my daughter's been born. And I don't know, I feel this new level of responsibility to be thoughtful and think about what I do and why I do it, and how I treat people, and leading with empathy, and all these things that just make life so much better.
Yeah.
And so then I went back to him and I was like, okay, so maybe I do have a responsibility to like be a good example. And, you know, and then probably a lot of that's like my daughter, because we go back to like, you know, the repeating of history, how your parents treat you and stuff like that. And so I think a lot about how I treat her when things go on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I've said this a billion times, but when you yell at your kids, you're teaching them to yell. And like when I heard that, I was just like, oh man, I guess I'm not yelling. You know what I mean?
Right.
Anything else? Okay, let me ask you this, because you know your dad better than me. Am I pretty? Is this feel spot? Am I off? Does this feel like I'm talking to some level of truth of what you know about your dad?
Yeah. No. Absolutely. I think that you know, he is. You know, one of the funny things, like my dad and I are very, very similar. One of the, you know, the times that we butt heads is because we're very much
similar kind of internally, like how y'all are like as people, right?
Yeah.
Because y'all have different views on other stuff. Like y'all have varying views on other stuff, or do y'all agree on all your views and stuff as well?
No. We have very different views, and like, so it's like sort of external, sort of surface level things. Like, yeah, we're very different, but then
that's kind of what I was.
As you like, you know, we're very, very similar, and so like, so I think I have this one. You know, like one of the similarities we have, I think, is what you're getting at here is like, you know, he's got opinions, and you know, when you're talking about a subject and there's disagreement, he's not going to be shy about
letting you know,
telling you he disagrees with you and giving the reasons he thinks you're wrong. But you know, he also respects someone that stands their ground and has reasons for thinking the way that they do, and you know, it has a lot of value in it, in that kind of exchange of ideas. And I think sometimes if a person, you know, I know I've experienced this in my own personal life of, you know, if someone's not used to that, it can sometimes come across as combative.
I think a lot about like when you go to New York, you know, people are just like kind of not rude. They're just going fast. Right. And like you come from Texas, and you're like, God, these people are so rude. It's kind of like that. Like if you're not used to like kind of that direct talk, it can be very intimidating or feel very negative or whatever. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And, but you know, once you kind of get on that wavelength and like, oh, like this is just, you know, a free exchange of ideas. And, you know, my opinion is every bit as valid, and we can just go back and forth and have this discussion. You know, as soon as you kind of get on that same page, that's what's going on, then it's a lot of fun to go back and forth with someone, you know, and bounce different ideas off of each other, and have your ideas challenged or challenge someone else's ideas.
Do you think, in a way, when we talk about like large families, you know, and there's going to be like a lot of people that disagree, and the bigger the family, the more potential for people to disagree, right? Like, and have different ideas and opinions and stuff like that. Do you think sometimes, like when you talk about like the kids that like you have to work with, and the lack of that family structure and the lack of these conversations and stuff like that, it just makes them like that more feel alone and fragile, because they've never had to have difficult interactions or odd interactions or support in the way a big family does? Do you think that has any effect on it?
I mean, I think that there isn't, a lot of these kids don't have the opportunity to work through difficult interactions or difficult relationships in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Right. Because like that's some of what you learn in, a bigger family that has that stability and is healthy, is like, yeah, we can have these disagreements or be mad at each other, or yell at each other or whatever, but we're going to work through it. We still love each other, and we're going to navigate this. Like, a lot of social skills are developed, and empathy is developed in those kinds of environments. But, you can have a big family, but if it's toxic, you're going to have a lot of negative lessons come out of that.
In all the times that you and your dad like bumped heads, did you ever doubt that he loved you?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. I think, I don't know how you do that, whatever that is, right? I feel like that's what my parents did with me. I feel like a lot of really healthy kids, minus, like the basic things that, things are just going to go wrong, nobody's going to be perfect. But I think, I don't know. I think if somehow you can hit that mark where your kids, like, they try to defy you, they butted heads with you at moments and times, but they never doubted that you love them. That's like the most, that's the bottom, that's the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. And maybe on some real weird level, like all those kids, like, it's like, all you need is love. Like all those kids at your school, all they need is just love. Like they just never got love.
Yeah.
They have no idea what it feels like to be loved.
Yeah. Absolutely. I can, I've got like a few different directions that I would want to go from that, but like one of the things that, my dad did, growing up was like, so, physical affection and things were not things that he got from his dad growing up. And so when he was becoming a father, those things didn't come naturally to him. And I know, like, one of the things that he implemented in the home was like at the dinner table, when we asked to be excused, it was just kind of standard that, like, yes, be excused. You went, you gave dad a hug, before you like went and put your dishes away, and that was just, a way that he built in, an opportunity for affection, he
was doing his best.
Yeah, no, it was a reminder, it was sort of him recognizing, like,
that was not,
I didn't get this when I was growing up, and I want to make sure my kids get it.
Right.
So I'm going to build in, like, this is just going to be one of the things that, that I do to make sure that I'm showing affection and like building that in and make sure that they know that they're loved.
How did that feel to you, being such an empath? How did you receive that whole interaction, being as empathic as you are?
Well, it wasn't something that I appreciated, at the time, because, I didn't, as a kid, I didn't know my dad's history with, my grandpa. And I also, growing up is like, that's just what you did, when you're growing up in your family, it just feels natural. And so I never really thought twice about it. So, it's little things like that he did. You kind of talked about, improving on, trying to improve one generation to the next. That was something that he did to improve over kind of the parenting that he received.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to say a second ago when I was talking about the different tangents was that, you talked about the, these kids, like they just, the kids that I work, they just need to feel loved. They just need that experience of love. And while that's true, once those ideas of yourself have formed at a very early age, getting a genuine experience of love is actually a really difficult thing to do, because when you're a kid who
you don't know how to do it.
Exactly. Like when you've been, mistreated and, neglected or abused, you now have these ideas of, I'm worthless, I'm not valued. I don't deserve love. You've had a model of that's told you who you are and also how you should be treated. And people are generally most comfortable with interacting with someone who sees them the way they see themselves.
Right.
So if I think I'm worthless, I'm not someone who deserves to be loved. If I have someone who comes, let's say I start dating someone who's a genuinely loving person, and they're like, no, I love you. I think you're someone who's valued. For me, that's gonna be like, oh, I don't like this. This feels uncomfortable because this person they don't actually know me.
Right.
Because I don't deserve to be valued. It's like you don't know what to do with that. And so you push them away. And then you have some dirtbag come along who does treat you like crap, does treat you badly. And strangely enough, that feels more right to a lot of these people because it's like, oh, this is what I'm familiar with.
Right.
This person actually sees me and treats me how I see myself. And so that very simple idea of like, oh, they just need love when they're coming from this trauma background becomes much easier said than done.
Do you know, tell me if this is wrong. The simplest example of that is, shout out to my friend Patrick Massey, because he's the first person to do this to me. I didn't realize how uncomfortable I was with like human touch. And he came up, like when I first met him, the first time I met him, he came up and gave me this big hug. And then when I was done, he wasn't done, right? And he just kept hugging me. And I remember feeling so weird. And I was like, why was that so weird? Like that I was just like, I just wanted to get out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you take that example and you amplify it to like someone that just does not want to be hugged.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you hug them and they're just like a board, right?
Yeah.
And like, to me, that's like the like just the easiest example of like not understanding what love is. Like, you know what I mean? Like you literally reject just like a hug. You reject that hug. You know what I mean? That's so weird.
Yeah. It like for some people, it just doesn't feel right on a very like visceral level.
You know what my favorite thing to do is when I do find people like that, then when I interact with them and we have some level of a conversation that seems like it means to end with a hug, I'll just go, hey, do you want a hug? And they'll go, no. And I'll go, okay. And I'll just move on. But then sometimes they say yes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they go, yeah. Like they're mad at me for asking, but like, yeah, I'll take a hug. And like, I like that. You know what I mean? It's just, I feel like, oh, I got like a little inch, like I gave them just a little bit of love and they actually maybe felt it,
Yeah.
like cool with, that feeling, changing their mind about like how it has to be,
Yeah. But, I think I think it's a great idea to do the asking first, right? Because there are some people who don't like to be touched. They don't want to be touched. And so asking like, hey, can I give you a hug? They say no. It's like, cool. Glad I asked.
Well, if you've watched one all the way through, I usually end with a hug. Like that's how I end.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, I noticed on the video, I would tell people, I'd go like this. I make everyone give me a hug. And then I noticed I started saying that. I was like, that's fucking weird. And so now I'm trying to consciously go like, hey, I ask everyone to give me a hug. You know what I mean? So how I usually like to wrap this thing up is I just ask people like, what do you do to take care of yourself so that you can take care of all the others around you? So you're a big exerciser. You said you try to do that every morning.
Yep.
Are you pretty consistent?
Yeah.
Is consistency the key?
Yeah.
Does it make your job better?
Absolutely.
Does it make your brain work better?
Absolutely.
Does it make you more present?
Yes.
Yeah. So big thing. What else do you do to like take care of yourself? Are you a reader at this point?
I am a big reader.
Audiobooks or regular reading, like normal people reading?
No, so it's a normal people reading. I keep meaning to get into audio because I love podcasts.
Yeah.
I listen to podcasts all the time. And I know that audiobooks would allow me to consume more of the material that I want, but I just don't want to pay the subscription to audio book or whatever.
Well, I definitely I think God bless Audible came up with a plan for people that don't listen to books as much as everybody else. Cause there's a plan where it's like once a month,
Okay.
but now I'm on a plan where it's like every 4 months. Cause I was just like, I was overloading with credits on my Audible
yeah.
account. What else do you do?
I try to always have new skills that I'm developing, or like ways that
Like
I'm
little
trying
hobbies
to.
and things?
Yeah, like so.
What are you into right now?
Rubik's Cube
Oh, yeah.
right now.
So, okay, can you solve one?
Yeah.
Okay, can you solve one fairly fast?
Yeah. So what happened? So it was probably like 3 years ago 2 or 3 years ago that I was like, I want to learn to solve a Rubik's Cube. I want to learn to
Without
do that.
taking the stickers off? Yeah.
Yeah. and so, looked up some videos, figured it out and been like, okay,
It's a pattern, right?
well, it's learning a series of algorithms that you have to, kind of memorize and apply. And it's not as though it's just a series of moves that you just blindly do no matter what kind of order.
It is dependent on what the block is doing.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's thought that goes into it, and you do different algorithms and things based on the arrangement of the pieces. So, memorizing, in this scenario with this sort of constellation of colors, here's the algorithm that I do for this stage, and then here's the next one. Okay, now I'm to the final stage, here's the set of algorithms. So it's all of these algorithms that you've got to memorize in order to be able to do it.
And so you did not solve a Rubik's Cube as a kid?
No.
Okay. When was the first time you saw, how long did you work on it before you solved one as an adult?
Well, it depends on what you mean by, sort of solving it. Cause like I would say, when I sort of put on the video, I had and was sort of following the steps that it was showing me in the video. No, this was like, first, it probably took me like 2 hours or so to solve it. But that's given, like, I was literally watching the video and they're like, okay, step one, do this. And I'm like, pause it. Okay, step one, okay, next, and like going each step of the way. And then like I'd screw up something and have to start over at the beginning. But, so it was probably 2 hours to get my first solve and be like, okay, I did it. But then it was probably, I don't know, 3 weeks or 4 weeks before I had all the algorithms memorized.
You could actually do it
and didn't need the video. Because like for the next 3 weeks, I'm going, okay, I think I got the first stage memorized, and I get to that stage, I'm like, wait, what's the algorithm for the second stage? Go bring up the video, right? And look it up and be like, okay, got it now, and so, yeah, but it was probably like 3 weeks before I was able to solve it without needing to reference the video.
When you say a stage, does that mean like a side? Like you've got this side, and so there's a certain way when you have two sides, like.
Well, so lots of people think that you solve like, sides at a time, and that's where they get stuck. Like, I can do one side, but like, what do I do now? But it's actually solving it in layers.
Mm-hmm.
So, most people will start with the white side on the bottom, which means the yellow side's on top. And what happens is you solve the white cross first, and then, you either solve the white corners, or you can, when you get a little bit better at it, you can actually solve the corners and that next layer at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And then and so you just sort of build up the layers, and then, and then you get to the final layer and you like solve the yellow cross, and then you solve the yellow corners, and then you get all of them arranged. And like each stage has its own sets of algorithms that you've got to memorize in order to be able to do it.
Does this make sense? Did you have to get past the idea that like you're gonna fuck up shit that you've already solved? Like as you're does that happen? Like as you're solving, you're messing other stuff up, but you're kind of coming back around to it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that, like, I feel like that's where I got stuck, because you'd feel like you've accomplished something, and then as you start trying to accomplish something out, that starts to fall apart in your fucking hand, and you're just like, well, never gonna solve this ever, apparently.
Well, what I would tell anyone that's trying to do it is, don't even bother trying to just do it yourself. Like, think your way through it. It's freaking complicated. Like, just
how do people do this for YouTube? Like, I mean,
that's what I want to know. I do not know
YouTube University
how you would do this with like just like a sheet of paper with like arrows pointing different directions.
Is that what it was in the beginning?
I guess I would. I don't know what else it would be.
I mean,
Which is just crazy to me.
no, I just think like now, like when I need to learn something on how to like edit the podcast or something, I just go to YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and like that's so wild because like I'd never thought about it until this moment, like a Rubik's Cube of like I don't know how anyone learned how to solve them back in the day. I guess I had directions.
Yeah.
Oh.
So it was probably like 3 years ago that I did that. And so there was a period of time that I, sort of put it down, and it probably took me, anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes to solve it. And then probably about a year ago, for no reason, just because like, again, I like learning like new skills. I just got in my head of like, I wonder if I could solve it in under a minute. Like, and I just set that as like, I've got the goal of solving a Rubik's Cube and averaging under a minute, not just like doing it one time.
Yeah.
And so I was working on that for probably the past like 7 months or so. And I've gotten to the point where I can solve it in under a minute. And I thought when I did that, I was like, I just want to do under a minute. Once I can do that, I think I'm going to be good. And then I got to under a minute, and now I'm like, I wonder if I could get under 30 seconds.
What is like the world record?
Oh, under 5 seconds.
Can you wrap your head around that?
No, so some of those like YouTube tutorial videos that I watch, it's these like really good YouTubers and or these really good cubers. And what they'll do is like, they'll show you some algorithm and they'll go, okay, so it's like this, you here, here. And they're doing it very slowly. It probably takes 10 to 15 seconds to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, okay, and here it is at full speed. And like, it's the finger speed is so fast. It is blinding. Like
That's wild.
It is wild.
So when you learn these little when you have these little things you do, what is that? How does that help you to make you better? Like, what does that do? What do these little things do for you, that like these little hobbies and things?
It's for me, it's just different ways of challenging myself, of just stretching my abilities, growing my abilities, keeping my brain sharp, having
the plasticity of your brain, right? Yeah.
And just having goals and things, even if they're silly. Like my goal of getting under 30 seconds on a Rubik's Cube is super silly. Like, it serves no purpose, but it's fun, right? It's just a challenge. And there's nothing wrong with having a silly fun goal, but it's just this thing to,
I mean, I'm making videos in my garage, so like, you know what I mean?
It's something to look forward to, and it's a new challenge. Another thing that I did, this was probably more like probably 5 or 6 years ago. Like, I decided like, I want to get good at chess. My dad had shown me how to play when I was a kid, so like I knew how the pieces moved, but like nothing beyond the basic mechanics of the game. I didn't know anything beyond that, and so I just decided like, that's my thing. And I got sort of like I'm doing with the Rubik's Cube right now. I got super into it for a really long time, and it was great getting to challenge myself and getting better and learning different openings and how to play with white and how to defend with black. And
how have you done any of these things that have become like long-term kind of, I don't want to say hobbies, but like kind of passion projects, or like things that you just really enjoy doing because you enjoy doing it? Have any of them become long-term, or most of them kind of you just like you like kind of mashing little things going on something else? Or like, how does that make sense?
Yeah. No, like, so chess is at this point still has been a long-term thing. So
you still play chess?
Oh yeah.
Would you consider that a way that you kind of relax and like make yourself better?
100%.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that activity. But it's like there was a period of time where I was like actively like studying chess and like learning about different openings and like playing a lot of chess games online, like with a real goal of like getting better and better and better. At this point, like I'm not actively studying chess, but I am still playing, so I'm still
Are you still learning? Are you still learning in chess?
I would say so. I'm learning through the experience of playing games. There's sort of a difference between like real explicit, like
opening the way you open, and then playing in an actual game, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like there was a period of time where I was actually studying different openings. I'm gonna learn about the Queen's Gambit and all the different variations that can come off of it, or learn the Sicilian defense or whatever. I'm not currently doing that. I may at some point return to it, kind of in the way that I started by learning the Rubik's Cube and then came back to it. So there's a point where I may return to it. I actually keep itching to kind of do that again, but I still get just the act of playing and like keeping your mind sharp in that area. You get better.
Yeah. What else do you do? Anything else?
One of the ways that I try to stay active right now is like mountain biking, which like I actually specifically do like dirt jumping. I did that as a kid. Was like, I was really into like BMX, dirt jumping. Like I loved it. And then like as I kind of got into college, sort of drifted away. I went to school and like didn't have a track or anything. And actually it's kind of interesting. So for a long time, I was really into playing guitar. Like there was a long stretch of probably 10 to 15 years where I played guitar like multiple hours a day, every single day. But over time I developed some, I had like chronic tightness in my pec and through my shoulder.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And it very slowly just kind of got worse and worse and worse until it reached a point where I actually just like can't play anymore. And so that actually left a pretty big kind of gap in my life. Like this was my hobby. Like when I had free time, I was playing guitar. And now all of a sudden I didn't have that anymore. And so there was, I'd fill it with do some chess and stuff and things, but, it was actually just recently, like I had always wanted to get back into the dirt jumping, and that stuff. But I was like, man, I really don't want to hurt myself. Like I'm not 16 anymore. Like,
so that you walk right into my next question. Like, have you had a pretty bad wreck?
Yeah, I broke my wrist after like 2 months of doing it.
Oh, I don't know if I've met a civilian like gen pop person that does like mountain biking that hasn't like had like a horrible wreck. My brother had a pretty good sized wreck where he like ripped like half his side off and like his elbow and his arm was like all bruised and black. And I was like, is that really worth it? Like, you know what I mean? I'm gonna stick to just like bench press. Yeah. I'm not gonna do that stuff.
So I found a bike park in New Hampshire that had really cool jumps, but they also had individualized lessons.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a lesson with someone who knows what they're doing and they can help me with my technique. And hopefully if I can get out of this beginner stage, I'll be all right. And so went down there and, had my lesson planned, and they were like, oh, actually, the guy who'd be really good for you, he's not available right now. He'll be available in like 2 hours. Can you wait till then? I'm like, yeah, all right. That's fine. That sounds good. And so I went out riding, case to jump, went over the handlebars, broke my wrist.
Oh, man.
At the location where I was looking to get the training to not do that thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it healed up and I'm back at it. Or at least, it's snowing up there at the moment. But
well, kudos for you to like getting back at it.
Dude, it's so much fun. And that's the thing is all these people like on mountain bikes, they hurt themselves and then they get back to it because it's so much fun.
Well, man, did you have a good time tonight?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Dude, thank you for doing this. I think we already discussed this. I am asking people now to give me a hug instead of making them give me a hug.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yep.